Great to be here today. We have quite an amazing panel, I have to say, and I would love each of you to come up now so that I can point out to you and introduce you at the same time. So we have... This feels like Jeopardy or something, right? Come on, have a seat on the couch. I can start right here with Peter Thum, who I first met when he still had founded Ethos Water, and was just about ready to sell it to Starbucks. Since then, he has started quite a remarkable organization called Foundry 47. Am I pronouncing it properly? Fonderie 47, which I'll let you describe in a moment, but it's doing something quite extraordinary. Next, we have Cherie Blair, who is the founder of the... Oh, and Peter's first child is on its way within the next 18 days. So if he gets a phone call, and I'm sure all of you already turned off your phones, but if he gets a phone call and runs away, we'll know that it's because you're in labor, or your wife's in labor. He's in labor too. First time you always are. So Cherie Blair. When I asked her how to describe her, there's so many ways to describe her. She is the founder of the Cherie Blair Foundation for Women, working with women and girls. She's very interested in women's rights, a working mother, and has been very close to government for many years. And then we have Simon Frank, who is a newly transplanted from the UK, is newly moved to New York. He was the founder of Red Bus, and now has the Simon Frank Foundation working in Southeast Asia, which he'll tell us about in a moment as well. Then we have Cora Neuman, who joins us from the U.S. State Department, and she has where her title is the Senior Advisor for Global Women's Business Initiative. And she was also the founder of a program originally done with RAND, which was the African First Ladies Initiative, which she'll be telling us about in a moment. And then we have Rachael Chong, who is the founder of Catch a Fire, which is a social entrepreneurship organization, and she's very much a social entrepreneur. So the way I'd like to start it is for each of you to in our conversation before, it seemed like each person here came to what they're doing currently from a personal inspiration or a personal experience. And so I'd love you to describe that and then describe specifically what your organization is doing in about 2 minutes each, so we can go around and then we'll dive into the conversation. So you want to start, Peter?
Is this working? Hello?
Yeah. I think it's working. Keep talking.
My name is Peter Thum, and I am the CEO and co-founder of Fonderie 47. And I think there are two specific experiences in my life that I would point to that have led me here today. The first was about 10 years ago when I was working for McKinsey & Company in South Africa. A series of events led me to meet women and girls who didn't have access to clean water, and that led me to decide to try to start a company to take advantage of consumerism to make people aware through their behavior of the water crisis and make them a party to beginning to address it. And that became Ethos Water, and Starbucks owns that brand now, and we've funded water for about 500,000 people around the world. And it was Ethos Water and the work in water in Africa that led me to meet children and young men armed with assault rifles. And it made me realize that if you're doing one kind of development work, but you're not taking into consideration other kinds of risks, that work is at risk, your capital is at risk, and the lives of the beneficiaries are at risk. And so that led us to found Fonderie 47. We turn AK-47s from Africa into jewelry, watches, and accessories. These are very, very high-end pieces. Rachel has been kind enough to lend her neck to me. So if you could stand, you can let people see. This is a piece made by James de Givenchy. These are eggs. It's called the Phoenix Collection. So the eggs are all made of AK-47s. They're adorned with diamonds, and the piece is made of rose gold and platinum and conflict-free diamonds. And we've destroyed about 20,000 assault rifles in Africa over the last year. Thank you.
Cherie, your turn. Yes.
I'm just contemplating the necklace, actually.
That's perfect.
Okay, where do I come from? Well, one is something that I take with me all the time, and that's because I was brought up by a single mum and my grandmother. And so I've always believed in the strength of women, but I've also knew from a very early age that unless women were able to support themselves and have financial independence, then they would never be able to achieve their potential. And that's something that's informed my work ever since. But in the more near-term thing that decided me on what I was going to do with my foundation was when I went on a trip with the World Bank to Tanzania and Uganda, where they were giving out money to banks specifically to lend to women-led businesses. And in conjunction with that, they did a training session for women, and they told me a wonderful story about this 3-day training session. And on the first day, they had a marketeer from Canada come and talk to the women, just like you've had some people talking to you today, about the importance of marketing. And one of the women there had a business whereby she got other women in the village to make mosquito nets, and then she sold them. And everyone was encouraged to bring their goods with them. And outside the training room, they would put them on display. So on the third day, she came in and she said, I heard what you said about the importance of packaging. So I ran round my women and we came up with this new packaging idea for our mosquito nets, which they hadn't been packaged in that way before. And they said, oh, that's great, leave them outside and come in and we'll finish the training. And that morning, the manager of the hotel walked past the table and said, oh, I've just noticed these mosquito nets that you have in this nice packaging, and I want to order some for our hotel, and in fact, I think I might be able to get you an order for the chain of hotels in Tanzania. And I thought, what did that tell me? One, how fantastic it is that women pick up these ideas and they run with them. And the other is that what a shame it was that it was only a handful of women in Tanzania who were getting this sort of advice. And that led me to think, what can I do to try and reach as many women entrepreneurs as possible to help them help themselves, and by doing that, help their economies, help their societies to develop.
Excellent. Simon, you're on.
Hi. I grew up in quite a modest background, and I went to school in a fairly deprived part of London, state-run school. And I think growing up, the thing which always bothered me was, one, there wasn't a level playing field. There were plenty of kids coming from homes which weren't the most supportive and going to schools that weren't as high standard as we'd like. And that really they didn't have a level playing field. They didn't really know how to change their situation. And I always thought to myself, if ever I get a chance, I want to work on trying to make a level playing field. The second thing also, I've always really been bothered by injustice. It's almost pathological rather than altruistic. I just don't like to see things which aren't fair, that don't feel right. And I think that if you're lucky enough to have some success in business like I had, it gives you an ability to start to tackle some of those issues. And so I created a foundation to focus on, in my own way and with the resources I have, to try and create some kind of path to a solution for some of those things that were bothering me. And the foundation that I set up, there's two things. The main thing we do in terms of expenditure of money is we operate in a number of countries in Southeast Asia where we do programs from building orphanages to schools to scholarship schemes to secretariats to help NGOs collaborate better, and various projects which you'd all sort of support, and primary sort of response services in Asia. But actually, one of the things that's become clear to me in the last few years being in the NGO field is that a lot of the solutions to the issues that we see are going to be solved by politics, not by just weight of money. And so another part of the foundation now has become very focused on supporting left-wing thinkers, activists, think tanks, who are trying to change the agenda, wake people up, get more people involved in the process, more people at conferences like this thinking about issues, so that we can actually change the debate. And that's what we do.
Great. Cora.
Thank you. Well, there are some similar themes in my work and my reason for doing the work that I do. I've been working, I'm, as you said, founder of the African First Ladies Initiative, and I also currently work at the U.S. State Department. And the work that I do carries a theme through it, which is mostly focused on helping women unleash their potential. And not even, it actually starts with them recognizing their potential. When I was approached by a group of African First Ladies about 4 years ago, requesting more information on potential partnerships in the U.S., I thought, this is an excellent idea. And you may or may not be surprised to hear that that I received a lot of pushback from different potential partners. Here in the U.S., what do we know about First Ladies? How do we know how to partner with them? How can we get the full due diligence on what they can potentially do? And I took that opportunity to really bring them over here and have them speak directly on what they do, what they care about. They recognize the needs in their country more than many of us do here. And so it's really been about giving them voice and giving them the opportunity to share best practices with one another, because you see that they really actually can act as a catalyst in their countries and use the leverage of the position of First Lady to make a lot of change. And it's really, once they recognize their potential and understand how to use it, you see some incredible changes being made on the ground. My current work at the State Department has a similar effect in that we work with women entrepreneurs for very similar reasons, as Cherie Blair mentioned, that women need often just very small amount of investment and training to really unleash a catalyst effect among the other women entrepreneurs on the ground. And we see women paying it forward like you wouldn't believe. In many cases, they really will. Once they get even a small 2-week training here or in their own countries, they will return home and pay that forward to the women around them. I have some excellent case studies, as you can imagine, but for example, one of our lead women entrepreneurs started as a sole business owner not too many years ago, and now is employing 3,000 rural women across northern Uganda, and has been able to train and continue to empower other women entrepreneurs across the country. So that's it.
Rachel.
Hi, I'm Rachael Chong. I'm the founder and CEO of Catch a Fire, which is an online platform that connects nonprofits and social enterprises with professionals who want to give their time and their skills pro bono. And the reason why I'm working on this is to solve 2 core problems. One, on the nonprofit side, the statistic is that 95% of nonprofits say that they need and want access to pro bono services, which basically means they need and want access to talent, but they don't know where to go to get that. And then they don't know how to effectively mobilize that. So we're trying to bring talent to the social good sector. And then on the other side, the statistic that we're trying to combat is a 60% volunteer dropout rate in the United States, if you can believe that. And what I mean by that is that in 2010, 63 million Americans volunteered. But in the next year, 2011, 60% of them dropped out, which is kind of astounding. And my personal story in terms of how I got here was I started off as an investment banker out of college. And while I was there, tried to volunteer my financial skills, as I think many of us want to do, is maybe now some of us want to quit our jobs and take that extreme path and go start our own thing, but I think a lot of us also just want to build a good career and through that also be able to give back in a little way. And I found that it was really challenging to do that within the bank. I tried to volunteer my skills. I couldn't find any way to do so. I felt that my peers had the same experience, and so that problem was obvious. I later quit investment banking and went into microfinance. I helped to start up a foundation in New York called BRAC USA. At BRAC, we mobilized a lot of pro bono professionals in our first year. There was only 2 full-time staff. We mobilized 9 pro bono professionals, and we were able to raise $40 million in that 9 months. And not every organization can do that, but what I learned from that was the power of pro bono to help build capacity, meaning it helped free up my time and the CEO's time to focus on what was critical path, and that was essential to BRAC's getting off the ground.
Excellent. I'd love just to begin a conversation now and throw out some questions, and for everyone to jump in when they have something to say, and be respectful of the fact that there are many people here who've got really interesting things to say. I would love to hear you talk about either the role of entrepreneurship within your organizations, or as you believe in the sector altogether, including how you can think about metrics, about scale, about leveraging other organizations. So jump in. I know, Cherie, you've got some very specific ideas, and Rachel, you do as well. So, and I'm sure Peter.
Okay, I'll start. I think what we try and do in our foundation, we call it the 3 C's. We try and help women entrepreneurs by building up their capacity, which can be our business training that we do, their confidence, because there's one thing about women all over the world, you know, me included, we're so used to being told what we can't do, that we need the confidence to understand we can do whatever we want. And the final thing, and the thing that keeps me awake at night, is their access to capital. Because across the world, women don't get access to capital. That's the same whether it was when my mother, after working hard and struggling, having been left by my father and getting herself to a position where she wanted to get a mortgage in the early 1970s in the UK, being told that unless she had a man signed for her, they wouldn't lend her any money, which was absurd, because if my father, who at that time was a well-known actor, well-known womanizer, well-known drunkard, had been signing for her, what bank would think he was a better bet than my mother, who had,
Every bank.
But no, unless he signed for her, she couldn't get the money. Now, that's an example in the UK, but it's still happening across the world. Women don't get access to capital. They're not taken seriously. Many countries, they don't have land rights, and if you don't have land rights, you can't raise capital. So all of these things mean that we have to do something to change that system. And my foundation works with local organizations to try and make that happen, to give women capacity, confidence, and capital.
Cora,
Let me jump in because great minds think alike. Secretary Clinton has also, and the team at the State Department that works on women's entrepreneurship has identified very similar barriers to women's.
I wonder why that is.
Which is access to capital and markets, leadership, which really feeds into the confidence piece, and training. And so we have actually, the Secretary formed earlier this year the International Council of Women's Business Leadership, which has subcommittees that are focused on those 4 pillars. And we are working together with the Cherie Blair Foundation to identify emerging women leaders, not just at the top level, but all the way down to local entrepreneurs, and helping to empower them. And I think that that's the role government can play in trying to assist, supporting. We can't directly, obviously, support entrepreneurship or business, but we can try to help identify barriers, identify potential policies that will impact women's ability to access capital, even get down into issues like maternity leave and things that relate to women being able to work and start their own business. And so I think that we, from a government perspective, what we can do is play a supportive role in terms of identifying barriers and helping to work together with other institutions to address them.
So Peter and Rachel and Simon, do you guys need government to scale your efforts?
I think to scale what we're doing in the initial phases, we already work with government to the extent that we did
Government in Africa or government in the U.S. or
well,
where?
we worked with the U.S. government to figure out how we could actually export arms material from Africa to make things, and then worked with government in Africa to obtain the material. And now the NGOs that we fund work with government and the UN to collect arms from combatants and provide them to us for destruction. So absolutely, government's important. I think if you look at arms as an issue, it's an issue that's based on fear, it's based on secrecy, a lot of it's based on illicit trading. Small arms, which is a very small market relative to the things like tanks and planes where countries and companies make money, those kill more people and more women and children and non-combatants than anything else in the world. And so I think that government ultimately will have to get involved if we take seriously the responsibility and opportunity of doing something about this, because while we as a couple of guys with a startup have destroyed a pretty significant amount of guns in a year, when you want to get to the numbers of millions, you have to make it interesting enough for people in government to take a role. And that will involve significant change, because right now, frankly, the largest countries in the world that are sitting on the UN Security Council also make a lot of the guns.
Oh, I wonder who they are. Simon, you.
Well, obviously it's a little bit different with us because we're working on the ground as a foundation rather than as a business. But one of the things that we have had to deal with a lot is how to work with government or how not to be blocked by government in the places where we operate. some of the countries where we operate, government really are in the way in terms of corruption. I mean, it's blatant. I mean, I was prepared for it in that people had told me it was like this, but when you actually witness it firsthand, you actually have to, in some cases, literally hand over cash to get someone to let you feed someone. I mean, it's absurd, but that's what goes on. That's I mean, an extreme example. But there's gentle corruption all through the process in the places where we operate. Having said that, there are also some pretty wonderful people in government in those places who actually really care and aren't in it for themselves and want to help you. But again, you have to be very open to the delicacies of dealing with their culture. And I'll give you one example, which is where we're very busy, which is Laos. So Laos has a prima facie communist government, although the definitions blur these days into what's communist and what's not. But they have prima facie a communist government, and they're very afraid of foreign powers in terms of NGOs even coming in. By being a private foundation and not being a large public NGO, we're able to have partnerships with government where they feel less patronized, they feel less dictated to, and we can have a much more entrepreneurial sort of conversation with them, because we don't, I'm not the head of Oxfam or Save the Children. I don't have, what I say is not going on record to anybody, and I'm free to have that sort of open discussion that perhaps some of the larger NGOs can't. And so being entrepreneurial in how you deal with these governments and learning how to dictate the sort of many pitfalls that there are has become something I've had to get used to. It wasn't a skill I'd ever had before from business in the UK, which is a very business-friendly place to do business. In operating in Asia, it's you have to work with government.
Gotcha. Rachel, you got
Sure. Well, as a social entrepreneur, I think, in terms of, why start something in the first place, I think is to address a social problem. And if the government was doing their job perfectly, perhaps entrepreneurs that work in healthcare, that work in education, that work in access to water, wouldn't have to do the things that they do. So I think, the entrepreneur, especially the social entrepreneur, is somebody who looks at the problems of the world and says, okay, well, government is not addressing this, so what is another way that this can be done? So to answer your question in terms of, how does an entrepreneur and government play together? I think, to Frank's point, it's...
Simon, but Frank's fine.
Simon. That's it.
Simon.
It's Simon. It's
Feel
Frank's
free,
last name.
whatever
That's
you
all right.
Sorry. To Simon's point, I think it's really important that government not get in the way. If they're not solving the problem, well, then at least they can get out of the way so other people can solve their problem.
But you're leveraging other organizations. I mean, all of you are leveraging other
Sure.
organizations.
I mean, we should probably distinguish
Yeah.
between governments in the fields where we're operating, so
Yes.
governments on the ground in, say, Laos, Cambodia, or Western governments
Yeah.
who can maybe assist us in what we're doing. And
Absolutely.
one of the things where I think is really important is that we can be, especially private foundations, but also the big NGOs, we can be more flexible than government can be. We can move quicker. But the government is the heavy weaponry. When you really have an emergency, only governments can really respond in scale. And I think our job is to make sure that we build trust with our respective governments in the West, so they believe in us, they know what we're talking about, so that when we see something where we really need critical help, that we can have that conversation with the State Department or with DFID or Foreign Office in the UK to say, look, this is a problem and we really think you guys should look at it. So it's about building a dialogue and trust on both sides, both in the countries where we're operating, but also with the Western backers who have real firepower to provide aid when needed.
Yeah, I mean, I think another play, and just to come back to the policy piece, because we are a foreign policy institution, the State Department is the job of educating those in our own government, in our own country, and in countries around the world about the prohibitive policies that may be in place and how, moving forward, obviously there's, we're hoping for progress not here and as well as around the world, educating emerging business leaders about the policies that may be getting in the way. And that's something that, it's an evolutionary learning process for everyone involved.
So thinking about entrepreneurship, because we've used that word, and we've got three specific entrepreneurs on the panel here who've got come from the private sector and have brought those skills. Do you want to talk a little bit about perhaps either the difference of entrepreneurship in the private sector versus the social sector and the ways in which you have to work with other institutions, or?
Personally, I don't think there's really any difference. I think that entrepreneurship is effectively, I believe it's primarily a person taking a set of resources that they gather together and creating value essentially out of nothing. And they do that more efficiently with new approaches that the market hasn't yet conceived of, and therefore they can gain support that isn't by either creating something entirely new or by creating something that's better than what's out there, which could either be in the form of a new piece of software or the form of a new piece of jewelry or the form of a new solution to a social problem, which could be microfinance versus the withholding of capital from women. So I think that entrepreneurs do this the same whether they are trying to build a startup in Silicon Valley or a startup to solve a problem in Kenya.
You guys agree?
I think that the way I approach my foundation is actually that we very much like to try and act as a catalyst. So the first thing we do is we find local partners and we try to work out, asking them, how do we help women entrepreneurs here? What needs to be done? And to build, using our skills, a program. What we then try and do is we have an idea, we do the research, we then try and run that program to illustrate what we found in our research, what works and what doesn't work. And at the end of that, having validated what does and doesn't work, actually then it's about throwing it open to everybody else and saying, look, here's what we've discovered, take it up. And what we really aim to do in the end is to move on and to start being the catalyst in another area. And that's very much what we did, for example, with our mobile phone research, where we looked at whether women across the world were getting access to the benefits of the mobile phone technology, identified ways in which mobile phone technology could help women entrepreneurs. We are now running various programs in different countries to illustrate that, and our aim is, at the end of the day, to get the private sector or the government or whoever to take that on, and if we've proved the concept works in small scale, to take it and...
So you're trying to catch a fire.
Yeah.
Right.
You know something, that entrepreneurialism is a skill set, and it's not necessarily applied to anything. So you can apply it to a business, you can apply it to charity. And the best organizations, in my opinion, in this field are the ones who use their entrepreneurial skills to problem solve. And that's really what we're talking about. There's lots of issues out there, and hopefully the skill set we have will help us come up with a novel approach, an efficient approach to solve that problem. And that's really where entrepreneurialism as a character trait or as a skill set are important. I think the same skill that makes you good at business is probably going to make you good at running an organization in the third sector.
Go ahead.
I think we do witness a government attempting to learn from business. You see more and more of a trend in terms of, looking at how to be more efficient and how to find new innovative solutions.
But not necessarily entrepreneurs in government, but
no,
government's really
no,
looking
no,
at.
Well,
Yeah, I was just curious,
also,
yeah.
sure, to some degree.
Really?
But we've seen some really innovative solutions that we could certainly learn from. For example, in Ethiopia, one of our the alumni from the State Department's African Women's Entrepreneurship Program was having a very hard time. She and her network were having a very hard time accessing capital. So they decided to start a women's bank, and not a microfinance women's bank, but a medium enterprise, a women's bank. And they have found, it's being founded by a number of wealthy women in Ethiopia that are going to create a parallel system to prove a concept. And I think that that's something that I see more and more receptivity in government to those types of solutions.
Is that for profit, that bank?
No.
So it's run for a philanthropic purpose. That's
Yes.
amazing.
Let's jump in. I'm wondering about entrepreneurship in your skill matching, which is the sort of issue of excess capacity, where you're looking at there's a capacity of people who want to volunteer and want to engage in social good, and there's social good organizations that need very much the kind of skill sets. So you've created this platform that allows you to do this. In terms of scale, how is it scaling right now? And do you look at taking, as you hear all of these conversations about international, do you imagine people being able to work within international organizations for social good as well?
For sure. So to answer your first question about where we're at and then scale, so we're in a very new space, a marketplace connecting the talent to the organizations that need it, which means we're the largest online pro bono service provider in the world, which doesn't say much except that nobody's really done it before, in my opinion. So where we're at today is we're serving 2,500 organizations, and we're connecting.
All U.S.-based organizations?
all US-based in the sense that they have some sort of US presence, but many of them work internationally. And the way Catch a Fire works is that we're connecting, again, that talent to specific projects that a nonprofit needs. And this can be done remotely. So the idea is to make a skills-based match that then can be flexible for somebody's busy professional schedule. And so, yes, indeed, I think that this can be international. And in fact, it's interesting to see lots of little Catch-a-Fires popping up. In fact, in the UK, there's an organization that completely just totally like ripped Catch-a-Fire's
Imitation is
website
the highest form of flattery, right?
Get what you're gonna. So yes, I totally think that this is something.
I met them actually. Yeah.
Okay, great.
I do think it's a great idea, though. I mean, I can tell you as an organisation, I mean, I hadn't come across the equivalent, but I think it's a brilliant idea, and we would definitely use you. I mean, if you can get us great staff who work pro bono, God, I'm all over that.
So we have one more minute before we get into questions from the audience. But I'm wondering if you want to talk a bit about scale. Like, what do you imagine your scale? I know you have a very ambitious one. You want to talk about scale for you and impact and scale, however you want to describe it or however you measure it. So we can go real quickly here and just give me 10 seconds.
I think we're a global brand ultimately with jewelry, watches, accessories, competing against the world's finest luxury goods companies and destroying hundreds of thousands and ultimately millions of guns, and funding programs to give occupational training to former child soldiers and the stars in academia, government, and entrepreneurship in Africa and the war zones that we're cleaning up.
Great. Cherie?
Well, so far we've reached in my foundation 6,000 women, but we just started a mobile phone app in Nigeria, and in the first day using that we reached 1,500 women, and the aim is to reach 67,000 women using that app. So what I would say is that mobile technology can take things to scale that otherwise you could only dream of.
Wonderful. Simon?
Well, with the resources we have, we picked 7 countries to operate in. For scaling for us, we're hoping that we're going to inspire other people to follow the model that we've set in those 7 countries, in other countries. Ultimately, we have to, no one person or one organization is going to solve everything. The second thing in terms of scale, and this speaks to your conversation about the communication and new technology, is that we really believe we've got to wake people up to the problems in the world. And fortunately, the internet and all the telecommunications advancements that have been now mean that you can have a really loud voice. And there's some very interesting models out there now where policy websites where people can join up to get behind an issue. And those are the kind of things we're supporting.
Great. How about scale? Are there more countries in Africa we could think about? Getting more African.
We actually, as the U.S. government, don't really have a scaling problem.
All right. How about impact then? Let's talk about impact for you. Yeah.
So for impact, we do have programs. And so, for example, these women's entrepreneurship programs, we are scaling them across the world. So we have Africa. We now have Latin America. We have Asia, the Asia Pacific, the APEC economies, and we're looking towards developing something in the Middle East. And what we do is bring individual women entrepreneurs over for training and business skills development. And they return to their countries and have been launching their own individual women's business networks and continuing on to train hundreds and eventually thousands of other women. So there is scale through the programming piece.
Great. And then this is the last. We're not going to be able to have questions because we've got some people who have to rush off. But
so again, 95% of nonprofits in the United States don't have access to human capital. So we want to make it possible for all of these organizations to be able to access talent. And then on the other side, we want to make it possible for everybody, such as yourselves, who have skills and talents to be able to give that. And by giving that, have a transformational experience for yourself that shows you the power of you in terms of being a change maker.
So everybody here should sign up either as an organization or as a volunteer in Catch a Fire, and buy some of this gorgeous jewelry. And and I thank you very much, all of you.
Thank you.